today to bring you the first episode of Lessons in 3D Printing with Proxy Forge and with our first teacher, Scotty.
Hello, Zeke.
So I just wanted to give a quick little intro, and I say hello, I guess, not be rude, to what this program is going to be and how it's going to function. The person teaching the lesson is not always going to be a guru in what's going on. We are just learning very simple skills, and it is somebody who knows something teaching somebody who knows nothing how to do very simple mesh manipulations or whatever we decide the lesson for the day is going to be.
Right.
So today, what are we doing, Scotty?
Well, what we're doing today is taking a look at a program called Blender. And Blender is a program that's used all over the sort of amateur and professional world. It's free, which is fantastic. It can do many different things, which is fantastic. But unfortunately, it is a little bit of an imposing computer program with a lot of a learning curve. So what we're going to be doing is taking a look at how to take an STL model that you have for 3D printing. What I have here is a one of the beautiful Mori elves from Lost Kingdoms Miniatures, and if you wanted to take this model and put it into a different pose, you can do that with Blender fairly easily. It's a fantastic software for 3D animation, and you can use those tools to create static STL files that are a modification of an existing STL that you have. So what we're going to do is take this dancer elf, and we're going to try and put her in a different pose in the same way that you might with a physical miniature.
Okay, I want to interrupt for just a second. That is, so that's a fantastic skill to learn, but I want to recommend very quickly here. First, just Googling how to manipulate Blender and spending like 5 minutes moving around the program and just kind of like zooming in and
That
out
is
doing-
actually what I was going to start with.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah. So let's talk about some basic manipulation of how to move the camera and rotate, pan, etc. in Blender, because Blender uses some very different tools than a lot of other software programs use, and it's very easy to start out floundering. So your friends, when you're manipulating, are going to be your middle mouse button or scroll wheel and your shift key. So you're going to use the scroll wheel in order to zoom in and out, just like this. If you hold down the scroll wheel, you have a rotation, and if you hold down the shift key and the scroll wheel, you have a linear pan like this to move things around. And when you are moving around objects, you are in what is called object mode. This little drop down up here in the top left corner shows you exactly what you are doing at this moment. And when you click on an object, you will see it highlighted like this. So you can see that our scene has two objects in it. We have our dancer elf, and we have this little cube that shows up right at the beginning in case you want to do some sculpting. We don't need him, so I'm just going to hit delete and get rid of our poor friend the cube. Now, you can see that when I click on my elf, I get this sort of axis view here, and I have a rotate command that has lit up blue in the top left over here. There's also move, which pulls up your usual XYZ movement axis, and you have these little square bars, which I could hold to change the scale of the miniature.
And if I'm not mistaken, there is also a widget that you can do to do all of them at once, kind of. Like there's a specialty widget.
Yes, transform right here allows you to do everything at once, which is fantastic if you really know what you're doing, but it can be difficult if you, for example, are, not entirely keen on Blender. So what I tend to do is stick with the individual commands because I don't want to accidentally scale my model when I want to move it, because that can be a real pain in the butt to get it back to the scale that you originally started with. Because as you can see, if we use our fancy transform, these little square bars right here, that's your scale, and this little arrow is your move.
The only reason I bring it up at all is because some people like myself are used to this exact widget from some other software, so just knowing that it's available.
It does exist. It's right here, the transform button. And you also obviously have scale individually as well if you want to do that. Now, there's one thing that you might notice about this, is that our elf has turned up in somewhat of a strange position, and the center of the field of view is over here. So if we want to rotate, it's very graceful and nicely, it kind of looks like a nice dance, but it is a little unfortunate that they've chosen that to be our origin. So there's going to be something we're going to start with here, which is showing you how to set the origin of an object. When you are assembling, say, a builder file, or doing really any kind of object manipulation in Blender, this is a very handy tool to know how to do. We're going to choose just the tip of her toe to be our point of rotation and movement, so that we can get her. So I have clicked on this cursor button, and then the cursor button allows you to place the static cursor right here.
Okay. And the static cursor is always the origin, or is there a specific way? Oh,
no.
I see.
So what we're going to do is go to the Object tab right here, which is a command that is going to apply to the object you have highlighted. So if you have multiple objects in the scene, you have to be careful to make sure that you have the object that you want highlighted. And you're going to say set origin, and set the origin to the 3D cursor. And now, what you'll see if we turn on our rotation view is that our elf is nicely rotating about her toe, so that we can move her just right to the center of everything. And then we completely sort of miss, because moving objects in 3D space is always quite complicated. Okay, that looks about right.
One axis at a time.
Exactly. And you have to be kind of careful to manipulate things in space. I'm also going to move this cursor just out of the way. Get out of here. All right, so
keep in mind that you actually could set it to 0 by actually setting the location on the right under transform to 0, 0, 0. That is another option.
Mm-hmm.
It can also, that option there, as you can see on the right, you can also lock and unlock positions. Right. So just useful little things that can be done.
True. Yep. There's all different ways to do things in Blender, and there are just all manner of buttons that you can push, and levers that you can pull, and knobs that you can twist. It's
more than almost literally anyone on Earth knows.
Exactly. And they're all at your command at all times in sort of a bewildering fashion, as long as you know the exact order to click things. So one thing I will do during this video, if I can, is when the order of clicking and manipulating things is very important, I will try to pause, slow down, and just sort of say things very slowly the first time that I do them, in order to allow people to kind of have the time to maybe absorb the information, write it down. So if you hear me do that, that's why I'm doing that.
Yeah. If I'm, depending on how lazy I am, I might also like put like key presses on screen as he says them, and
sure,
do something editing wise.
Yeah.
But I am often lazy, so you might hear this and see it in the video and just see nothing.
That's possible. Okay. So we are in object mode currently. And Blender operates in various different modes. You can see we have several different options right here. We could go to sculpt mode if we wanted to edit the actual appearance of our STL. But for right now, what we want to do is manipulate its existing geometry and get it to move in the various ways that we want it to, so that we can manipulate this STL file. Because often when you are in the 3D printing world, you get a sculpt that is just absolutely gorgeous and amazing, that you are in love with, that you want to build an entire army with them like the basis of your basic troop, but you only have 5-10 poses, and they are nominally monopose. Everyone, I think, one of the basic things that we learn is that you can use mirroring to swap a model's position across an axis to make it look different in appearance, but being able to actually pose a model is another cool skill that you can have and add to your repertoire. And
another interesting thing, I sometimes go on a tangent to talk about the 3D printing industry in general.
Okay.
There's a bit of a love in artists for dynamic poses.
Yeah.
And this is coming from when dynamic poses used to be the rarest thing.
Right.
But now sometimes you'll get 5 of literally the world's most dynamic poses, and you're like, I don't necessarily need my 5 soldiers to be flying vertically through the air.
That's true. However, I will make note of something. This is a good point to bring this up, is that what we're going to show you is actually dramatically easier the more dynamically posed a model starts out. Part of the reason why I'm using this ballerina is that she's, for all intents and purposes, essentially in the classic T pose, which is not just for displaying dominance, but in fact also allows you to very easily manipulate and get your skeleton to exactly where you need it to be before you animate something. So she is going to be highly convenient in that respect for us when we try to build in our bones and assign the weights to the bones so that we can move her arms and legs and head around and all those kind of things. So
Teabagging is for Halo players. T-posing is for real warriors.
exactly.
Like,
So
just saying, assert dominance.
we're in object mode. Object mode allows us to move things around, but doesn't allow us to do very much else. What we need to add to start off our sort of posing journey is we need to go to an add drop down here, and we need to select armature. Now, you might think to yourself, that didn't do anything, I must have clicked something wrong. No, in fact, the armature is here. It's just very, 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 very small. This is one of the helpful services that Blender provides to you, is that it puts something in your scene and it makes it very tiny so that you can't see that you've successfully done the thing. Also, you'll notice something unfortunate about our armature is that we want to put it inside our model, but it is disappearing inside of our ballerina's toe here. So once we've clicked on it, and you can also click on it by coming over here to the right where you see my mouse moving over here, we have our armature, and we are going to change how it is visible. So you have all these different properties, incredible amount of properties that you're going to look at. Your drop down here says, saying viewport display, you want to click this checkbox that says in front. And now what this does is it will keep the object in exactly the same place in space, but it will make it so that it is always visible through your model, no matter what. Now, this can make the object fairly difficult to exactly pinpoint its real location visually. You can see that it's inside her foot, but it always looks like it's in front of her foot. So it can be a little difficult to track exactly where your object is. So you'll see me doing a lot of rotating to check different angles to ensure that the bones that I put in, this is what's called one small bone in Blender terminology, to see that the bones that I put into the model are actually positioned where I want them, as opposed to somewhere off in space, but that visually looks like it's where I want them from the current angle. It's not just to make you busy, to make you dizzy.
Often what you can do in order to position things more clearly in 3D space is to position them along single axes at a time.
Yep.
And
so
the easiest way to do that
set
is
yourself
to
to just one axis, set up your position, switch to a different axis, set your position, etc., etc. We're going to be doing that. Yes.
Yeah. And so that's just a general 3D navigation thing. It is useful for all kinds of 3D printing applications.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a good technique to know because often you have to interpose things or position things that you can't really see easily. So just dealing with the absolute values tends to be the easiest way around that.
Exactly. So you have the little navigation over here that allows you to very quickly switch the angles that you're viewing your model from. So you have this angle, that angle, underneath, up top, that sort of thing. And that will allow you to precisely locate your bones, which is very helpful. So we need to actually start putting our bones into the model. In order to do this, we're going to enter edit mode while we have our armature selected. So we are now editing our bones and putting them in the correct position. So you can see I have my little bone editing ready to go, and you'll notice a new functionality that you have as soon as you enter this mode. You can select the endpoints or the middle of your bone. Selecting the middle of your bone moves the whole thing. Selecting one of the endpoints leaves the other endpoint where it is, and helpfully allows you to make your bone larger, which is very good for seeing it and not losing it in the toe of your model. So
I do generally appreciate my bones being larger than my toe.
exactly. So here is what we're going to do. First, I'm going to rotate it. The bones have a bottom and a top, as you'll see. By default, if something is connected to the top of the bone, if a bottom of a bone is connected to the top of a bone, then the top of the bone, or the top bone is going to control the bottom bone. So what that means is, if I have it oriented in this position, and I create a neck bone, which I'm going to in just a moment, to control my model's head, then moving this chest bone will also move the neck bone, as well as the shoulder bone, all the arms, just like we'd like to do on a real living person. If you rotate about the hips, you would expect that your arms, your head, etc. would follow along with the direction of
Okay,
your
so you probably actually want to make
chest.
the bones almost as realistic as you possibly can in that case.
You can get real crazy with them. And I'll also show you a... So if there is an area of the model that you're kind of okay with leaving as static as possible, so let's say we don't particularly care if we have perfect fine control over the neck of our model, then I am going to add a separated bone. So there are two different ways that you can make bones, right? Okay, so let's say we've created our torso bone here, and we're going to create a hip bone. So you can go to this extrude tool down on the lower left. That allows you to click on one of the endpoints of your bones, and you have this kind of control circle. You click.
Looks a bit like Adam. Oh, never mind. Just looks a bit like an atom.
Sure.
Go
So
on.
you would then click and drag, and you can see that I'm extruding a new bone out of my existing bone that is automatically already connected. And then I'm just
Okay,
going to
but,
position
so
it as well as possible.
I have one more question here.
Yes.
But both of those bones are controlled by the middle bone, if I'm not mistaken, or by the bottom of the middle bone.
So what you essentially have in this situation is that neither of these bones are going to be authoritative to each other, but they're going to be connected. So I would be able to rotate the hips without the chest rotating, and I'd be able to rotate the chest without the hips rotating.
Okay.
If I extrude a bone, let's say a head bone, like so, out of here, then what this is going to do is if I rotate my chest bone here, my head will also rotate along with it.
Okay. So if you extrude downwards, it makes bones that are not actually authoritative to each other then.
Yes. So if you do,
Okay.
if you create this, that you have an independent relationship and you can rotate about the hips without moving along with the hips here.
Very cool.
But however, this you can connect your bones up however you like. However, there is a slight problem with this bone positioning right here, because I might want to be able to have my model's head move relatively independently from their neck. So I would have the whole head and neck rotating from this point right here at the sort of like base of the throat, collarbone. But instead, I'm going to delete this bone, and I'm going to add a new one. So in future, I'm going to add new bones by using the Shift A key to just add another one. But for now, showing the location, and it appears down here on our origin, very, very small once again. So I'm going to make it a little bit bigger so that we can see it. Move it up to the position where I want it. And carefully position it to be kind of in line with where we want it to be. About in the head of the center of the head of the model. And we're basically going to make this bone just the size of the head. Now,
Okay.
this is where we're going to get into offsets. So I would like basically this neck to be uncontrolled free space. I'd like to be able to move the head and have the neck kind of stay attached to it, but allow me to have the model look around in various directions. I don't necessarily want there to be a neck bone. I could certainly put a neck bone in if I wanted to, but for now I don't want to.
Having bones that make up an entire spine tends to be a bit complicated.
Exactly. So here's how we get to have a bone connected to another bone without being physically attached. And this is one of those sort of strange, everything must be done just so Blender idiosyncrasies. So you first select the bone that is going to be the child feature, so the one that you want to move when you move the controlling bone, and then you hold in your shift key, and then you select the bone that is going to control it, right-click, parent, make. You can also use Control P to make this faster. And we're going to select keep offset. You know you've done it right when you have a little bit of a dotted line connecting 2 points in bones. So now you have basically the ability to rotate the head and have her look any which way, and the neck will just kind of be semi-uncontrolled space. And still, if I rotate my chest, my head is going to go along with it. So
I'm assuming it still almost counts as like a bone, but it's a bit less because it would still.
You don't have individual control of this point. You could create a bone right here to control the neck, but you will have control of the head and control of the torso. So
okay.
Then what I'm going to do is just add another bone using Shift A for add. Pull it up.
A very good thing to note here is that if you don't end the joints at proper joint locations, it can often end up warping the model in bad ways.
Yes, that's going to be something that you are going to be constantly struggling with, even if you put your joints in just the correct locations.
One of the great things about doing this with Space Marines specifically, or maybe not Space Marines, let's go non-GW copyright Space Marines, Spacemen, is that they tend to have those like really deep inset bits of armor around their joints. So no matter how much you warp them, they tend to look pretty good.
That's true. They also have, as Bob Ross might say, pauldrons hide many sins, if Bob Ross were to make Space Marines. So you can really mess up, really just Roger the shoulders of your Space Marines and just give them the whole business.
Bob Ross used to be a sergeant, a drill sergeant.
Sure.
Yeah. He decided after that he never wanted to yell again in his life, and that's why he started art.
Yeah, that's probably accurate. I can see that.
That is actually true. That is the history.
Cool. Now, let's say that you have a model with one arm, and you'd like to have a model with two arms. You can save yourself a little time. You just pull a box selection around your feature, and then you can go ahead and hit the duplicate key. And this allows you to pull another set of three, or of basically identically related bones out of your first cluster and set it up right here.
Oh, that is cool.
So save yourself a little bit of time and effort. You can see bones get pretty funky as you move them around because of the size scaling thing. Gonna take me a little minute to... This is extra handy to do if you're getting real fancy and modeling arms onto your creation, or modeling hands onto your creation with hand bones, because creating all of the hand bones in the entire universe takes a little bit of extra time. Now, I have completely messed up because I have not followed my own wise advice to work in quadrants.
Well, don't worry. If things get a bit too slow, we can always put a timestamp or either fast forward a tiny bit.
Yeah, that's probably a
so
good idea.
That might be happening, it might not.
There we go. That's more like it.
Yeah. Remember, since I'm editing this, you can feel free to take breaks.
Right.
Or, take silences or do whatever.
Okay, so I'm just going to try and get this to about exactly to the elbow point of my model. Oh, here's another thing that's actually kind of helpful. If you're just doing some fine adjustments and you just want free movement, if you grab the very center, you will not have to obey the sort of axis movement controls. You can just sort of grab and reposition your model by brute force.
Yeah. Almost every 3D program has a free move option, but it's always movement based on the current angle of your camera.
Yes, so something you're going to run into, and that why you might want to make small adjustments, is that everything is going to be based on your current position, and you're going to have to do a lot of rotation, switching to different angles over here to just verify that everything is operating exactly the way you'd like it to.
You know, I should maybe get a hold of some software developers in order to make a program that literally just does this, but has good transparency in the model and can place the bones more intuitively?
It's possible. It's worth noting that there is a free program that is an auto rigging software available online called Mixamo that specifically is built to just rig humanoid models that you happen to have. So if you have a T-posed or just like this dynamically posed model, you can use Mixamo to create a automatic rig and automatically stick your rig to your model and even to animate it for you. A lot of open source video game developers use that quite a lot for the purposes of creating dynamically posed models.
Very good to know. But I'm thinking with the advent of 3D printing, there might be more of a market for something even more extensive.
Yeah, probably.
Might.
Okay. We're just going to create our very simple...
And by more extensive, I mean that can more quickly rig non-human elements.
Yeah, that's going to be a big sort of factor of it, because Mixamo is hard designed to just look for humanoid elements, legs, arms, hands, fingers. That is what it does. It does that quite well most of the time. It's pretty impressive software. I've used it a couple of times. It's primarily for animating, but if you grab an animation file and pull it into our friend Blender here, you can then use Blender and go down here to this frame counter and run through the animation, selecting any frame you'd like. That's a handy thing if you were to ever find yourself in possession of a legally distinct spaceman T-pose model. There are all manner of, Call of Duty style gun holding, gun wielding, running, jumping, crouching, etc. poses right on there. And all you need to do is have your legally distinct spaceman and grab as many poses as you wanted, and then pull him into either Blender or Mesh Mixer or whatever program you wish, and strap whatever weaponry you wanted to have on him, and you could create functionally any pose you wanted.
Well, we have an idea for another video in the future.
Absolutely.
Because that sounds like a ton of fun.
Do you have a T-pose of a legally distinct spaceman?
I may have at least the location of a T-pose of a legally distinct spaceman.
That sounds like a wonderful... Maybe we should use something different. But that sounds like a wonderful idea for a video. Okay.
We should maybe not do the legally distinct spaceman, but...
You can now see that we have a rough skeleton for our model. So, now what we need to do is tie our model, strap our model to our bones, and get our bones to be authoritative over the model. So we're going to navigate back into object mode. You saw me do that up here on the left. We are going to
point out very quickly is that this is very good for both posing an individual, very artistic model, but remember that if it's not a super artistic model, but you want a whole squadron, you only have to do the bones once.
Exactly. So here's the nice thing about these dancer elves, is that they're all effectively different poses of the exact same model. So what I can do is just grab as many poses as I want, and this is extremely effective for units that are all wearing sort of the same uniform, is you construct one skeleton and you get it really nice, and then you can pull as many models as you want out of it.
And if you wanted to create artificial differences later, you could actually save them as individual STLs, then bring them into sculpt mode and change them up from there. There are several tools in sculpt mode that don't make it easy, but make it viable to change hair and change minor details fairly easily.
Yeah, that's true, especially if you're working with kind of a faction that it is a little bit more, gross and deformed, like a Nurgle demon would be perfect for this, because you'd be able to...
Tyranid or Zerg?
Yeah, exactly. You'd be able to just kind of mess around with the sculpting tools, and if it doesn't look, perfectly symmetrical or anything, it's not anybody's, not a problem with anybody. Okay. So, we're going to get into assigning the bones to the model. You first click your model. So you remember the first thing you click is the thing you're going to be assigning to the authority parent. Then you hold down the shift key. Then you click your skeleton. And now when you right click and go to parent, you'll see a few additional options. Armature deform. That is what we want. And we want automatic weights. And now we spend a minute waiting, offer up a little prayer to the gods of Blender that they will
bones.
give you, yes, to your beautiful bones, that they will give you a starting point. That is always appreciated when they do that for you.
I would like to once again reiterate, you want to first select the thing that is going to be submissive.
Controlled,
So
yes. The thing that will be controlled is the first click.
The thing that will be controlled by the bones, you click first, then you click the bones that are going to control it. I'm
Yes.
saying this because I'm the one learning, and that is the thing that I would be forgetting.
Yes. And you also hold shift, because if you just click one and then click the other, it just goes from one selection to the other. So you remember your friend, the shift key. The shift key is kind of, if you're using Blender, you're probably going to have your hand hovering over the shift key that is not controlling the mouse. So you would click first, then hold shift, then click again.
It's in all honesty, it's very similar for Lychee. Well, not quite. You always have your fingers on Control Alt Shift, and your mouse separate. But your fingers literally never leave those buttons.
Right. This is the kind of section that it might make sense to skip through, as it sort of works on its dark business.
Yeah.
So what it was doing during all that time is now you'll see in a moment. So what we're going to do is, you might think to yourself, now I can go into pose mode. Yeah, this is a new mode that we'll see in our animation window here in our drop down selection. You can go and navigate into a new mode, which is called pose mode. And pose mode allows you to click on these individual bones, and you will see the bone that is going to rotate highlighted in blue, and you have your rotation track bars. And now you can see that as we move our bones around, our model is also manipulated.
And let's do a quick zoom in on the warp just to show how it's actually pretty natural how it works. I'm always impressed by it. Like, I've seen some bad warps, but not often. If you get your bones correctly, it just looks like a natural wrist or a natural joint.
Well, not exactly. If you move too far, your triangles are going to get sad.
Yeah. Only if you, like...
Yeah. It's the primary thing that you're going to run into is if you have rotation that should look fairly natural, but it does its best, so it tries to deform fairly natural.
Not to mention, you can always save it to an STL, smooth it out, especially if we learn a bit of Blender later, a bit of Blender sculpting.
Yes.
So
that's always possible. So here's where you run into problems. So in a real living person, what would happen here naturally is that the elbow would be going out while the rest of it goes in. Whereas here we see that obviously the elbow and the corner are going in.
Yeah.
There are also going to be other things that are kind of tricksy about your automatic weights. So I have a hunch. Just watch the model's hair. So you can see that some of the model's hair is correctly moving with her head. New Hitman game looks great.
Yeah.
Some of the model's hair is moving with her head, but other parts of the model's hair are not. We would like the hair, ideally, to travel around her shoulder and kind of go naturally with the way that we pose her head if we wanted to, for example, move her head over here. Also, you can see that we're kind of grabbing a little bit of shoulder, so that if we wanted to turn her head all the way around, we would have problems in that her shoulder would start to be warped. Another thing you might notice is if you're moving your arm, your shoulder, you have a little too much torso moving along with it. So this is kind of the fine details. So you can see the front of her chest is also moving with the arm, where we would ideally like it to mostly stay stationary while the arm moved. Also, you can see that this elbow is working a little bit better than the other elbow. So all of this is kind of chalked up to the automatic weighting that weighting with a GHT that the program tried to do. So that arm looks pretty good. That the program tried to do automatically when we assigned the skeleton. It just tried to look, and whatever was the closest to the bones, it assigned it. So we do actually have fine control over that. If we head back into object mode so that we can select our objects, we first click on the skeleton and then we shift click on the body. You'll see a few new options pop up. The mysterious drop-down list that changes its options every time you click on it depending on what you have selected. Now, you see this weight paint. Weight painting is exactly what we want to get into. So, this is kind of the nitty-gritty of your skeleton manipulation. So, what you're looking at right here, this sort of heat map, essentially, the hotter an object appears, the more control the selected bone has over it. So right here, we're looking at the foot bone. Now, where you see those kind of odd animation artifacts appear is when you have improper control by a bone. So ideally, what we want here, when a person rotates at the ankle, we want their whole foot to come along with the movement of this foot bone. However, what you'd see as you moved this is that this part would move much more than this area of the foot right here. The automatic weight painting has not perfectly gotten the exact portion of the model that we want it to. Now, especially when a model is, for example, wearing armor or something fairly rigid that we want to be basically just hinged and moving by itself, like a robot or a space armored man, then what we would want is to just have just extremely rigid control over each bone so that we can essentially move it like a puppet. This dancer obviously is an organic object, so we want to have some warping around the edges to make it look like a natural motion of a body. So we do want to have some of the transition, but what I do want to do is I'm just going to click and hold, and this allows me to increase the control that my bone has over the area. So I'm going to just give it better control over her foot.
And then what would you have to hold in order to paint in reverse?
So what you'd have to do here is you'd have to change your target weight. So the weight ranges here from 0 to 100. So if you wanted to eliminate control over an area, which is something that we can also do, you would then go to weight 0, and then you could, for example, take control away from this area of the foot from that bone.
Okay. Very good to know.
So instead I'm going to do this. But one word of warning from someone who has endured a lot of frustration using this tool. You should think about the selection of this tool as the beam of a flashlight. Anything that your flashlight is not pointed at is not going to get selected. So you remember all that selection that I did up here from this angle. Now, if you were to look underneath, you'd see that this whole area has not been selected because the beam of my flashlight was not hitting it. One way to make this a little less present, a little less irritating, is to uncheck the front faces only option. I personally have never not unchecked that box whenever I went to use this tool, because little corrugated features like the little the swirls and details on this model, not getting to automatically hit the underside of them is just an immense exercise in frustration.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So what I just did there to increase the diameter of my cursor is I hit the right or left square brackets on my keyboard. That is what increases or decreases the size of any of your cursors in Blender.
Okay, I was actually going to ask, because usually it's like shift and scroll, but I was like, that would do something that I do not want to happen in Blender.
Shift and scroll. Nope, that does nothing.
Alt and scroll.
That appears to control the animation frames.
Control and scroll. I'm just curious now.
Nope. I believe what you're looking for is, well, scrolling obviously makes your cursor larger by putting your model farther away from you. But what you're looking for is the, it's the same controls actually as Photoshop. All of the tools in Photoshop have the exact same square bracketry. So I'm just kind of.
I know the square bracket thing, but there's usually
at
a
this
way.
point.
There's usually a way to use the scroll wheel. One second.
Anyway,
I'm just curious.
it's possible. So now I've finally adjusted the thing that wasn't really causing us much trouble in the first place. Okay. So instead, let's go take a look at that elbow. So if you remember, we had problems with this arm. When we rotated at the elbow, we had too much kind of squishing going on. So what I'm going to do is increase the authority of the
elbow bone,
bicep bone that we've put in here, I guess. The not forearm, the shoulder bone, over the elbow region. So what that should do is now when I move my elbow, or my forearm bone, it should have less control over this region, and that region should stay more or less the same. What I'm also going to do is give this shoulder bone a little less control over the front of the model's torso. So I'm going to take away control of this area of the model because I don't want it to move quite as much when I move the arms. And helpfully, because we've selected our front faces off keystroke, this leaf is not just a nightmare to deal with.
Yeah.
I'm going to make it very big so that I make sure I don't miss any details.
Leaves are the bane of my existence as a supporter. One of the banes. There's leaves, there's feathers, and there's chains. Those three things.
We do kind of want the arm to have some authority over the back region here, yeah, because that sort of looks natural for those muscles. Oh, sorry. Can we pause for a sec? What we're going to do is give the shoulder some control.
More control at the very end right there.
Some control. So I've set the weight to 50% here. You can see I'm painting in green instead of painting in red. That gives shared custody, essentially. Also, a thing to make note of here is that when you assign weight away from one bone, it will assign it automatically to another bone. One thing that you will often find here, this is a perfect thing to talk about, is your center bones, because they are outnumbered, and the way that the software automatically assigns weights is it starts with the middle and goes out. Because they're outnumbered, it assigns a little bit of control to each of the limbs, and your torso can end up fairly bendy when you move your limbs around. So what you probably want to do is to go into weight painting mode, give yourself a nice strong weight, and just give your model, that's unfortunate, Control Z, an excellent tool for everyone. Just give your model nice strong control over the very center of its trunk so that it doesn't bend anytime you move limbs around.
Another thing to keep in mind is that while most computers can run Blender, a lot of them will have a hard time with a lot of the functions. Just be patient with it, move slowly. If your computer isn't an absolute beast, or even if it is, you'll get a lot of slowdown in doing certain tasks.
Yes, true. You can see that my cursor is very much jumping around wildly, giving me sort of a fun stop-motion experience when I'm trying to perform the weight painting while it runs fairly smoothly doing other things. That's because, in terms of computation, the weight painting is one of the more complicated things that Blender is trying to do, because it's kind of adding weight to one area, subtracting it from every other bone, that kind of thing.
And every time there's any change, it has to calculate the basically how the entire body would behave. So exactly. It's just every single time they're is a calculation change. It has to stop, do the calculation, next step.
Exactly. So it's doing quite a bit of work when I'm doing this. And then we're just going to, yeah, this bone is also in need of some serious beefing up.
More than the chest bone, even.
Yep, that's because it's closer to the legs.
Yeah.
So mostly, I mean, especially because this is a good example of, I was giving the example of like armor earlier. This, like, tutu, honestly, would probably not move a whole lot when the dancer was moving her legs around, that being one of the major things that tutus do in ballet, is that they stay relatively stationary while the dancer is sort of twirling and moving around. So I want to give very strong control of that over to this hip bone so that I can control the location of the tutu relative to the body, and I don't get it super warped when I try to reposition my legs. Probably not going to get too crazy with the legs, honestly. Mostly what I want to do is that all of the pre-created poses for these beautiful miniatures were all they're all very splayed out and stretching their arms straight. And when you look at an actual ballet performance, a lot of the dancers are sort of twirling, and when they twirl, they alternate between holding their arms into their body while they're twirling and spreading them out to kind of flourish and show off. So what I have is a whole bunch of models that are flourishing, and I have no models that are twirling. So I'm going to give myself a little bit of extra pose variety by...
So before we take a very, very close look at this model's crotch, I want to talk about demonetization and Patreon.
Okay.
So we are going to start making a Patreon to have videos like this, to have instructional videos, and I'm going to try to get experts. And the Patreon is to A, pay me for my time, and B, to pay the experts that I am going to hire, and to pay anyone else who's helping on the videos. Mr. Scotty does not claim he's an expert, but he seems to be doing a very good job. So if you want to support that, please go check it out. It is in the video description and will be at the end of the video. It is at patreon.com/proxyforge, unless I change it to something else before then. Anyways. Thank you guys for doing that, and back to the regular content.
Okay. Yeah, let's do that while we talk about demonetization. I'm going to reduce the weight down here to 0 because I've accidentally selected a portion of the leg while I was trying to select the torso. So I could go into the leg bone and cause it to have weight over this area, or I can deselect it. So remember, as you're deselecting an area, you are also actively selecting a different area. So it adds weight to one bone while taking it away from the other one.
Yeah. Funny story about demonetization. And when I used to do more streaming of my support work, at one point I was doing this like hill troll, and when I got to the crotch, turns out he had a little dick in there. Like, it wasn't direct or anything. It was reasonably sized. Just this hill giant had perfectly, like, well done anatomy. And I was like, okay, well, there goes my monetization on this.
Whoops. Yes, so I'm just
times.
going into the legs and making sure that they don't have any authoritative control over regions that they should not. This part of the video is probably very exciting. Thrill a minute over here.
Yeah. Well, it's why I'm kind of doing this not only as a teaching series, but also as a talk show, almost.
Sure.
Yeah, it seems like a good mix, because so many of these things take time in them that we might as well discuss other things or discuss what we're doing in more detail as we do it.
Okay,
Well, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty solid about everything at this point. So what I'm going to do is, I would like to get back to pose mode, but as you'll see, it has disappeared from my options in my dropdown. What I need to do is go back into object mode, click on just my skeleton, and then navigate over here to pose mode.
Okay,
Everything.
So you've always posed the skeleton then.
So I've only clicked on the skeleton here.
Yeah. Okay.
And as we can see, our elbows are behaving just a little bit more like elbows. Excellent.
that back muscle is not doing too badly either.
Not doing too badly at all. So what I'd like to pose my model to be doing, ideally, is I'd like her to be performing a spin.
So you want her to be in like that leg bent position with her foot down and by 1 foot by the other leg in a kind of triangle?
What I was going to be doing actually is having her hold her body very close to herself, essentially. So she is going to be doing a pirouette, sort of.
Yeah. What I meant is like the classic pirouette pose with the yeah.
And I'd like her to be holding her sword with her arm sort of resting on the back of the blade.
Well, I like that with the hand.
Yeah, unfortunately, her fingers, I have not
Are
gotten as wild and crazy as I possibly could, and I have not put any control bones over her fingers. And her fingers, the
But
gap
yeah.
between them is actually skinnier than the blade itself. So what I'm going to do is just leave it kind of in her palm, like
Yeah,
this.
well, she could just be touching the back of the sword, like
Yep, that's the plan.
yeah. Often in martial arts and in dance, because those are actually the two most closely related sports.
Especially for these elves.
You'll just barely brace the back of a sword. Largely in Asian martial arts, not so much in European ones.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, you touched on something I'm a bit into, and I am autistic, so I get too into it.
That's okay. I don't mind. And we're going to have her doing what dancers often do when they spin, which is looking in the direction that they're going to be turning. So now we kind of like this pose. Oh, actually, her neck is looking a little bit rough at this point.
There we go.
There it is. So we're going to give her back her sort of forward-facing location. That looks pretty good. I like...
Is there any way to temporarily hide the bones?
Yes. There is, in fact. It's a quick shortcut over here. So
Okay,
if you want to
very
take a look at your model, over here you see the little eye that's open, and you can click it, and it hides the bones temporarily to let you take a look at the model and take stock, see what you would like to fix. So I might go into a different program, do a little bit of smoothing to this area right here in order to get it to be a little bit less warped, or I could always just choose to dial back a little bit on my skeleton work.
Another important thing to note is how small these things are. Often people looking at these things in programs will see like a tiny bit of warping or striation on the knees, and they'll be like, it's ruined. That is completely invisible to the human eye. You're talking about 40 microns,
Yep.
50 microns worth of space.
Exactly. And also something that we mentioned a little bit earlier is that I made note of the fact that if you rotate one bone, it will then go ahead and rotate all the rest of the bones that you have given it authority over. So you can see that I can rotate the hip of my model, and she is able to move her whole arms, her leg, everything like that along with it. So I'm pretty happy with this pose. I feel good. I've hidden my armature. I am enjoying this spinning elf. So what I would do is just simply go into export as STL and go into my folder that I have and just call
Often
it.
it's nice to have your folder pre-copy and paste it, or pre-copied so you can just get to it really quickly. The Blender UI is not great for saving and loading. So that's just a quick recommendation from me.
That's probably a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, so now what I would be able to do is, once I've exported my model, I can go ahead and repose her as many times as I possibly want into as many poses as I possibly want. I could decide that I want a pose with her legs down, sort of oriented inward. Rotate her at the torso, something like that, and pull a different pose. I could easily just keep exporting models as long as I wanted to make as many poses as I wanted with this model. And yeah, that's about that.
And what do you save as to save the pose? Because I know you export as STL, but what, do you just save it as a project file?
To save this, yes, you just save it as a basic Blender file, and then you would have, you would be able to go back to the, it would essentially open you back up in the pose that you're currently in.
Now, another question is the Blender file, the Blender project file dependent on the location of the original STL, or does it contain the original STL in it?
It, I believe, contains the original STL, and it's not dependent on the location. Once you've imported a model into the Blender project file, it owns the model.
Okay. Just covering some like the basic, make sure I don't lose all my stuff,
Yep.
you know.
Absolutely.
I remember the old days of 3D printing where T2 Box would crash 5 times a day, losing an average of 3 hours of work.
Right. So, yep, you're not too worried about it. You can export as many models as you want and just have as many poses as you'd like to have.
Okay, anyways, is that everything for today then?
Yeah, that's all I've got.
Okay then, thank you guys for watching.
Basic skeleton.
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed learning how to create a basic skeleton to put in the model. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do like, comment, subscribe, and especially share it. If you can, go support us on the Patreon. If you can't, go support us on the Patreon. Do it. Anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Okay.
Nicely done.
Yeah,
Very nice.
I feel like that went well.
No, I think that could be a very good series. I just realized that I was on the wrong scene, so the audio was only recording on your end. Hopefully that doesn't screw things up too badly.
Yeah, hopefully.
But if it does,